Welcome to the MBA series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book entitled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
I am Sean Berry, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Rachel Isreeli. Rachel is a Brooklynite, cooperative developer, and facilitator, as well as an inspiring food grower, herbalist, and Jewish, who spends a significant part of their budget on mushrooms. Rachel has been organizing for over a dozen years at the intersection of gender, labor, and sexuality in New York City, including around sex work, gender-based violence, LGBTQ homelessness, and immigrant-led worker cooperatives. Since 2014, Rachel has had her hands and heart in the cultivation of workplace democracy and collective economic power through the development of worker-owned cooperative businesses led by people who have faced racist, sexist, and xenophobic exploitation under the dominant system. Rachel worked at the Center of Family Life in Sunset Park's Cooperative Development Program for 5 years, incubating worker cooperatives and training community organizations to develop cooperatives in their communities. Currently, Rachel is an independent consultant for a variety of cooperative projects, as well as a cooperative developer at Rise Borough Community Partnership, where they are organizing worker cooperatives as a part of the Central Brooklyn Food Democracy Project, a Black-led food sovereignty initiative. Rachel served on the board of New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives for 4 years and currently serves on the advisory board of the Worker Place. Woo! Well, I'm excited to speak with Rachel today because as I got to know her through her participation in our Next Economy MBA webinar, I was always impressed with the depth of Rachel's understanding and experience working with worker cooperatives, her insightful questions, and endless resources they always contributed. She has a comprehensive skill set spanning governance, visioning, strategy, systems, financial planning, conflict resolution, facilitation, curriculum, manual development, and more. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Wow. How do you know I have all those skills? I'm so honored and humbled.
Well, Rachel, can you start us off by telling us about your background and how you first got interested in the work you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting to share and get the opportunity to reflect on some of the lineage that brought me into the solidarity economy world and co-ops. I would say, one of the strong lineages that I think of is how I got organized around sexual violence in college, which is a place that was just male dominated, and you could really see the patriarchal structures that would reinforce the boundaries of kind of men and women, the policing of women's bodies, and just the deep degree of sexual violence that was happening. That was also when I first joined a collective house, which has influenced a lot of what I've held dear as aspirations of community and also practice and learning about conflict and communication. So in the years that followed college, I continued doing some work around sexual violence organizing and also organizing with several groups here in New York City around policing of primarily Black bodies and migrant bodies. And so over a decade ago, I found those organizing around violence pathways converging when I was working with folks at who were arrested for sex work, essentially those who were criminalized for prostitution charges, people who were primarily doing work that was identity-based, both by gender, as well as the gender of their clients, their race, their migration status. And so the combination of sexual violence, policing, identity, and work was something that I was thinking a lot about. So what is considered work, depending on who does it, and how is it then valued? There's a big dialogue, of course, about is sex work? According to whom? And then is domestic work? What about incarcerated labor? So there's all this precarious and often isolated labor that might not be classified in law or in culture, our minds, as work, right? So work that's excluded from labor protections and also not thought of by everyday folks as being work or meaningful. So I started thinking a lot about what can we do about that? What are some of the solutions for the racist and sexist exclusion of folks? And then what are other ways of doing work? What else is possible for work in a variety of sectors that can transform existing power structures? Anyway, a mentor at that time encouraged me to go to social work school, and I ended up going to the City University of New York's social work program at Hunter, focusing on community organizing or macro social work, with focus on what's called the world of work. Now, I wish they taught us about co-ops and the solidarity economy.
Yes. Right.
I mean, that's one of, my passions that I would love to do, and love talking to young people in school, outside of school, about co-ops and the solidarity economy. But no, I had to learn that a little bit more on my own. But I did grapple with capitalism and analyzing more about the structures of work and labor. And I also got to get a deeper understanding about and practice of groups and group work, which has been a main side of my work and practice since organizing as an undergrad, a teacher after college, and all the way through. So through a lot of that, I was really influenced by Marxist feminism, how labor is gendered and produced. In this country, up through much of the 20th century, work is often equated with predominantly white, male, industrial employment. That's like factory work, and then the so-called firm or company. And so was organizing about labor protections, grounded in a white men's world. So work that's gendered as female, raced as non-white, especially Black and migrant, haven't been paid or protected in the way that men's work has. So I was using that lens of thinking about how can we challenge those power structures of patriarchy, racism, and classism when I was looking into what to do post-social work school. And then I found out about co-ops. So that is when I landed at the Center for Family Life's Cooperative Development Program in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, organizing domestic workers around creating worker cooperatives in 2014.
Wow, very cool. Thanks for sharing that. And it reminds me of, I don't have the exact stat, but if we actually valued, domestic work at what men's work is valued, we wouldn't be able to afford it.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent of a young child, I'm very aware of how crucial that work is, right, for our society, future of our society, and how expensive it is if, for example, for my household as parents, if we can't provide the work and we have to hire somebody else, it's very expensive. So very insightful theme here. And then I also relate to who's teaching about co-ops. And actually, CUNY now does have a course, right? Mm-hmm. Rachel Isreeli is teaching, I think, a graduate level course on worker co-ops, but it's like, one of the few and only. So you're ahead of the curve on that one. Well, that's a great intro. And so now what are you up to, or what are you most excited about now? Maybe tell us more about some of your projects that you're working on.
Yeah, well, I'll stick with a little bit maybe about how I'm thinking about co-ops and co-op development, and then talk about some of the work that I've been doing over the years with that. So I think a lot about co-ops as sites for the transformation of power structures, as I'm kind of mentioning. And, some of that is really using those groups to build individual power analysis and understanding of individual relationships, understanding and development of relationships within the group, and then groups as entities or mechanisms that can act upon bigger power structures. So for me, cooperative development is community organizing. I think that's not what a lot of people think about it as. A lot of people are like, oh, it's business. And it is, but it's more complicated than that. And, with the women and people of color led cooperative movement, folks are reframing cooperative economics as tools for building power and collective liberation, because through that cooperative work, members of co-ops can envision and enact economic relationships that directly oppose forces of white supremacy, patriarchy, settler colonialism. And, some of the components of community organizing are base building, leadership development, campaign development. And I think about co-op development in my work at the Center for Family Life, in the work that I can share about Riseboro, as base building in part. That's the educational work that we're talking about with undergrad and other schools, is, share with folks the opportunity, the pros and cons, what co-ops can do, and then build a base of powerful worker owners who are leading the movement. And that gets into the leadership development that is part of community organizing, and building in ways for political education, all kinds of hard skills development. So we know the principle of education, training, and information. And then organizational development is something that organizers think about. And that's so much of what both co-ops are doing within their co-ops, developing their organizations to be able to sustain themselves, be sustainable in currently the capitalist market. But also my role as a cooperative developer is to support the organizational development of those co-ops as well as networks. And so for me, like the campaign mechanism or the campaign orientation of cooperatives is, you can think about it as the development of a cooperative, but more cooperatives are a vehicle rather than a destination, right? And so the destination is what, for me, I use the solidarity economy. I appreciate that folks talk about the feminist economy or the caring economy or the regenerative or the next or the new economy. But I really think that the relationships cross co-op to build out networks, which is probably a lot of what I'll want to talk about too, is where that power can get transformed, not just from the kind of individual or group level, but to build more of a movement that is going to transform the way not only that we see work, and not only the way that people are valued, but power.
Yeah, I want to just lift up your focus on groups and the cooperative. While some people might think of it as a business thing, but it's really fundamentally organizing for collective power, right, and collective change. And it might not be an accident that it's completely missing, right, from the educational system. Even business school or even a green MBA, they're not telling you you can collectively organize, right? It's all about the fierce, brilliant leader taking risks and being a genius and all this stuff, which that all very much reinforces the individualism. I think of it as atomization of society, which is very new, right? If we look back, we're only around as humans because of our groups. Our families, our clans, our villages, our towns, all these small groups of humans caring for each other and surviving over time. And so now we've got this kind of myth of individualism, which is completely not true. None of us think about it. You have nothing if you don't have everybody, creating your food system and the electricity grid and everything. So it's like, yeah, I just really appreciate this profound orientation around groups. And then a dramatic reskilling, right? Because as that stuff's been strategically removed, you have all these, you probably see this, as we see it as well, is like, you have these well-intended people that say, yes, collective, let's do it. And then complete lack of skill set, right? How do we make a collective decision? How do we include everybody? How do we have patience for the process, et cetera? So yeah, I just appreciate that. And And also just wanted to, I mean, hear more what you have to say, but then also like this idea of from an individual group into networks. So then the pattern, right, expands. And so that's a way to further expand this work.
I can really geek out about groups and group development. And I think it's so exciting. It's a place that we can practice and learn. That's in my own experience many times over, and to build the confidence to do it on a broader scale. And, some of the kind of geeky group theory that I bring into co-op world too is, there are patterns of groups, and we can think about co-ops that way too. So folks might be familiar with forming, norming, storming, and performing as an approach to group theory. So you're forming, you're kind of like, what is this? I don't know. Like, maybe I'll learn a little bit about this group. Eventually the group goes into the norming stage. This 100% happens in cooperatives, and you're kind of creating a culture and a set of norms that might not be a list, but might come out of the actual practices that are happening in the group. And then there can be also some naming and refining. Then there's the storming, which is maybe one of my favorite because of just how natural conflict is. A mentor of mine once said, conflict is when the river has to go around the mountain, right? And so building in that nature relationship and the group storms, because there are so many differences and there's so many things to be in contradiction and conflict about. And working through that conflict, as you know, builds more confidence. It can be extremely challenging, but it can build a lot of resilience. And then groups may or may not make it to the so-called performing stage, right? And that can be when things have really gelled. You've got the muscle of democratic practice, the muscle of governance, and then of course laying over all the business aspects to it too, is how the business is doing and how that might be growing and being sustainable. I should also mention one of the things from the Next Economy MBA that I love in this framework is, I think you call it the 7 stages or phases of co-op development. I'm actually using that tonight in a workshop. I give y'all credit.
Oh, nice.
And it's about where folks see themselves essentially using those 4 social worky terms, but in co-ops themselves, and how they relate to their own participation and ultimately get to that norming phase of participating in a reasonable amount in relation to everybody else, so that the business and the group can move forward as while folks are also all heard. I love that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. So, yeah, I love that progression: forming, norming, storming, performing. That's great. So from your experience, what do you see as like some of the challenges and what work to try to, invite people into this collective process?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces is small moments of practice. And when there are little conflicts, kind of pointing them out as such. And what some people identify as conflict is also not what other people identify as conflict. And if we can see things that don't actually bring up enormous emotions as also conflict, and then build skills to navigate it, I think that can be helpful. And something that I've been doing now for years with support of others as well is just talking about conflict and communication from the recruitment stage of my work with co-ops. Before folks are even like, yeah, we want to create a co-op, I talk about this, and then we talk about it during the training before a group has even, maybe the group is in the like forming and not even norming stage. And so I can step back maybe and talk about what one of my projects is now, because this evening I'll be leading one of these first sessions on culture, communication, and conflict for a new co-op academy that we just started. And it's not yet at the place of getting into what are those particular dynamics within their co-op, but it's more like, here's what's to come and how do we think about our own selves, our own orientation to conflict, our own communication patterns and styles, and then apply that to what it might be to work with a group of folks with different styles or the same ones. So since 2020, As you mentioned, I've been working with Riseboro Community Partnership, which is a collaboration in the development of the Central Brooklyn Food Democracy Project. And one of the reasons that I transitioned here is wanting to get into a food-based initiative in my hometown of Brooklyn, New York, which is rapidly gentrifying. And I'm inspired by also Lyft Economy's next economy principles, one of which is basic needs, and the need to just really hone in on systems that we all need to thrive. So the Central Brooklyn Food Democracy Project is a unified vision of community food sovereignty, building a food economy in central Brooklyn, primarily Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, while advancing a culture of healthy food, resilience, and cooperative development. And this is in direct response and many years of organizing as a reaction to the historical practice of food redlining in central Brooklyn, as well as residential and commercial displacement. It also represents in these neighborhoods the largest and quickest loss of Black wealth in, I think, U.S. history in Bed-Stuy particularly. And so we are co-organizing along with Brooklyn Movement Center and the Central Brooklyn Food Co-op, a generation of entrepreneurs, workers, and consumers organizing cooperative enterprises. And at the center of this project is the Central Brooklyn Food Co-op. That's a Black-led, consumer-owned food store that is organizing to have culturally appropriate foods, education in a place where there had historically been lack of healthy and culturally appropriate food, and now there is a lot of healthy food, but it is geared mainly towards the white gentrifying population. And so as part of this cooperative, multi-sectoral consumer and worker-owned project, Riseboro is organizing worker cooperatives along the food supply chain that will do business with each other and with the consumer food co-op. So our organizing strategy with Riseboro includes a co-op academy and ongoing business support, as well as financial support of the cooperatives that come through the academy. So we just launched our second co-op academy last month, which is an all-Black cohort of 3 cooperatives: farm, education and wellness, Haitian food prep and products, all 3 committed to building food sovereignty, Black self-determination through a lot of intergenerational relationships with people and with the land.
Wow, I love the systems approach, right? So it's not just the co-op, the food co-op where you would go and get your groceries, but you're actually building the vertically integrated supply chain. What stage is it at in terms of the grocery store? And also you mentioned the second co-op academy. So what did something come out of the first?
Yeah. So the food co-op has been organizing for going on a decade now. And there is the hope of and plan of having a storefront in 2023 opening to public. There are active committees, business planning, outreach and education, fundraising, of course. And then with Riseboro, our first co-op academy launched in 2020. We had 3 participating groups, and the graduates are building up their businesses in consumer packaged goods with tea, inspired by family recipes. There's a nutritional education, culinary education cooperative, as well as a cooperative that we've been working with for a longer period of time that does packing and distribution. These are Brooklyn Packers, Beautifully Fed Foods, Sisters 3T, all Black-led worker co-ops. And they've already started to do business with each other in multiple ways, including sourcing, training, partnering with clients as well to both provide, for example, culinary education and the sourcing of food to do that culinary work with individual organizations as their clients. And multiple co-ops have also partnered with the Central Brooklyn Food Co-op already. Even though the doors are not open and there is not yet a storefront, there was a lot of organizing during the pandemic to provide food, to engage in mutual aid. and to do both, again, educational programs as well as provide food that was sourced, packed, and transported by the worker cooperatives involved.
Wow, amazing. What's your, looking forward, what do you see is do co-op academies every couple of years with a few new co-ops, launch the store, the co-ops are doing business with each other?
Yeah, and we're learning a lot as we do this because the idea of, the culture and the idea and the practice of this project needs to come from the folks who are involved in it and the co-ops that are organizing it. And as co-ops are an organizing strategy, as they are groups of humans, beautiful, incredible, flawed humans that are all learning, the pace is slower, especially as all of these work is not capitalized in the way that, other dominant business forms are. So the pace is slower and deeper of all cooperative organizing, right? So what we look forward to is the continued growth of the cooperatives and then their leadership over the project overall. So we anticipate a leadership team, who knows what the name might be, that will be directing the project as well. And that would have representation of all of the cooperatives, consumer and food owned. And we also imagine that once that happens, there might be a desire or a need for the development of a cooperative in a specific sector of food. And then we might have the role of helping organize and train for that once it becomes clear by the folks who are leading in this work what they need.
This is so exciting for me on many levels. First of all, it's hard enough to start a business, right? Just by yourself. But if you can start it within an existing network that there's even demand for, right? You've mentioned a few things, but maybe we need a last mile distribution, electric bike co-op, right? Which there's some models of that around. But if that became a need, then we could say, hey, here's $500,000 of revenue and we need, 4 founding worker owners. Let's go recruit them and train them up. And it takes a lot of that risk out of, what should we do? Because you've already convened a community. I love this, use the word solidarity economy. It was this very profound, right? Solidarity of these businesses the purpose of these businesses is not only to provide right livelihood and a meaningful good and service, but to exist as an interconnected network. And I'm also struck by, this country, United States, this kind of claims democracy, right? But look at this structure you're creating is there's actually this Congress inside a network of cooperatives where each one can have a seat and shape the vision and the future of it. It's really exciting for me. So on this theme of the networks, maybe we can zoom out. So that's some Riseboro, Central Brooklyn Food Cooperative Project, but how does that fit in with the larger New York City movement? And I'm curious, what you've seen over the last decade and what you see maybe coming.
New York City is so lucky to have some of the organizing infrastructure that we have around cooperatives. So there are multiple strains, but one thing that's worth mentioning is when I first got hired in 2014 as a cooperative developer, that was the first year of New York City Council funding for worker cooperative development in New York City. And my salary then was directly tied to that. And that had come out of years of organizing, of course, of multiple organizations in the cooperative sector, advocating for funding for mostly Black, Indigenous, people of color, especially immigrant-owned worker cooperatives in New York City. So since 2014, the coalition has gotten more than 10 million public dollars for this development. So we've seen really cooperative development expansion and support. There's a lot of work to go around how to build that out and some of the gaps and tensions inherent in getting city funding and the barriers that can come with funding sources, of course. But it's really enabled a lot of folks to learn about cooperatives and then get support to strengthen them. And I have to, in all of this, talk about my love for the New York City network of worker cooperatives, which is
NICNOC.
NICNOC. Yeah, no, yeah. So, the acronym is not maybe what it looks like, but that's NYC, NOWC, New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives, which is the trade association of worker cooperatives in New York City. And NCNOC has been engaging in worker-led policy and advocacy for cooperatives, particularly through their advocacy committee, which is an elected body of worker owners who come together and form policy. They they're part of many coalitions in New York City as well as the state. And last year they launched a New York City policy platform for worker cooperatives, which is really exciting. Can send you the link after today. And today is an example as well of worker-led policy and advocacy led by the worker owners in NCNOC, because today there's an action for the Worst Bank Awards as part of the Public Bank New York City coalition. The city is entrusting their money, public dollars, into major banks of Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, the same banks that, give money to developers to kick out our people, who make it difficult for small businesses, especially co-ops, to get the PPP loans during COVID, and who invest in other kinds of gentrified destruction of our city. And so worker owners are there advocating for a public bank where there would be greater oversight and alignment about what we need, what co-ops need, what people who are creating the solutions to their own problems need in terms of funds. So there's the organizing, the advocacy that NCNOC does, and then there's a lot of financial supports as well as training for the co-ops who are members as well. There's, I think, around 70 member co-ops and organizations of the New York City Network of Worker Co-ops. And some of what NCNOC does is some of my favorite too. Principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives, is just like I'm talking about with the Central Brooklyn Food Democracy Project. NCNOC brings a lot of co-ops together to peer support as well as to give and exchange resources. So one of the funding programs that NCNOC has been able to do with the city money is give financial support to cooperatives to provide services and goods for other cooperatives. So a worker-owned web developer creating websites for other cooperatives, worker-owned bookkeepers providing bookkeeping setup and services to other worker cooperatives, printing, and so on.
I know about this personally because one of my co-ops I work with, Samam Kaya, Scoliosis and Back Care Cooperative in Manhattan. Been working with them for years. And then they actually received a grant from NCNOC to hire me to work with them. And so I worked with them the entire year last year through this cooperative funding, which was amazing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's also part of NCNOC's Co-op Sustainability Fund, is a fund that is offered for co-ops for technical assistance, consultant-based support as well. Samam Kaya Yoga worker owner Kat is also on NCNOC's Advocacy Council, as well as part of the Training Collective, which is a collective of trainers, majority of whom are worker owners, who lead workshops for other organizations and people who are interested in co-op development. And they also lead some of the trainings for part of our academy as well. Who better to teach about the development of worker co-ops than worker owners themselves?
Very cool. And also, I was just going to mention just numbers, rough numbers, but because I was actually in the Bay Area for 20 years, and then I moved to New York in 2014. And of course, the Bay Area is, we're the big co-op, whoop, 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 we got all the co-ops, right? And they used to. And then New York City, I think, was maybe like even less than 10 co-ops at that, worker co-ops specifically. And now you mentioned 70 members of NCNOC, but I think there's even more. There's close to maybe like 100 worker co-ops that have come directly through this funding and development. New York City, overtook the Bay as the co-op, center of the country. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And one of the things that's also really exciting, zooming out even more, is the cooperation among cooperatives in other sectors too. So there's definitely a super vibrant organizing community in worker cooperative space, but also with consumer co-ops and there's another cross-sectoral network in New York City. That's the Cooperative Economics Alliance of New York City, called CENIC. And Scenic represents 8 formal sectors of cooperatives. And in the last 2 years or so, Scenic and Knock, along with UHAB, which represents housing co-ops, have done a lot of organizing for member peer learning, political education, community garden hangouts of folks who are part of housing co-ops, land trusts, credit unions, worker co-ops, consumer co-ops. This weekend, that network the combined networks are guiding a walking tour of Harlem's community-led and cross-sectoral cooperative landscape as an example. And really want to shout out Scenic's new map. That is a tool and a resource that shows the 8 formal cooperative sectors in New York City and where they're located throughout our 5 boroughs. You know, one of the challenges in this, as much as I've seen all this work grow in New York City in the last decade, we're still often a very small group. We're very intimate, and it's a challenge and an opportunity for us, an organizing challenge really, to make the movement more welcoming, to show its breadth, to show the kinds of ways that folks can get involved. Because I definitely do hear from people, who are, want to organize against capitalism, want to create, more just ways of working and engaging in the world, but aren't sure how to get in. So this is one of the opportunities that we need to figure out and strategize more as a movement. And I love that this map is a way to show, look, it's in your neighborhood too. Look at all these places you can hang out and get involved.
All right. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today, right? Is because even though we're celebrating, a growth in the co-op sector, like in the last decade, the Federation, U.S. Federation, is now reporting 1,000 worker co-ops in the country, which is up from like 300 or so kind of a decade ago. So it's like great growth, but like compared to the U.S. economy as a whole, it's completely non-existent. And so you wonder why it's not in any of the textbooks or any of the courses, because it almost doesn't exist if you compare to the largesse of even just small business in America. But the mutual benefit achieved from this type of cooperation is so outsized to what you get out of even just a great little small business. I feel like this is, our work is both twofold, like you're doing, like grinding it out with the groups of like, okay, let's get your communication skills and your conflict management and your business model and your little co-op up and running and connected to the network. But also, what we're trying to do on this podcast is share it out to a wider network and say, hey, we actually have solutions. And this idea that there is no alternative is dead wrong. Actually, the dominant economy is the worst way to do things.
That's dead wrong.
Yeah, that's dead wrong. And we have abundant solutions. They're just all around the edges, and they're not going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, But folks like you and I have spent our careers in this, know how wonderful it is. And that's our hope, is we can kind of get this out to a wider audience, so more and more folks start, organizing their own community and creating co-ops and creating right livelihood in democratic ways. So anyways, just want to appreciate you for your work and helping share these stories out.
Yeah, thank you for the platform you're offering for all the folks who get to be on your podcast, all the amazing folks that go through your cohort. It's really inspiring. And I love the combined ideas across the folks that you get to engage with and how together they really paint a very vibrant picture of possibility.
Yeah, I think that's part of the characteristic is, there's not one approach. That's why, we're partial to this word next economy, because we don't actually know. It's emergent. I mean, I love, like you, I love solidarity. I love purpose. I love all the words. But to me, they're like part of the rainbow of solutions that are coming through. And to me, the design constraint is, are we creating mutual benefit? Because we're not considering some stakeholders win and some stakeholders, well, we just don't talk about them. So when we get into the realm of mutual benefit, and this is what I hope the message gets out, is like the abundance that comes off these systems is staggering. How much beauty comes from collaboration. So it's not just we're creating beautiful food system, but we're creating really meaningful relationships. And then the party, are you kidding? when we have the harvest party or the celebration or the graduation, it's like, I don't know, to me, that's what we're alive for, is that multicultural diversity of expressions of vibrant lifeways.
And co-op world knows how to party. That's real.
Exactly.
You know, what you're talking about now with all the possible solutions is also making me think of one of the tools Lyft Economy shared too during the cohort of the Next Economy MBA of the hospice and midwifery curve. I think about this a lot, right? So hospice what are all the tactics that folks are using now in terms of organizing to meet needs that are really reliant on capitalist infrastructure, right? White supremacist reliance perhaps as well. Some of these might be needed, right? We have to fight all of these, we have to increase minimum wage, for example, right? We have to do all of this organizing work, but then all the opportunity for midwifery and birthing and creating fascinating, creative, networked solutions to bring in a world that is grounded in relationship, in true democracy, in equity, and in care for each other and the planet. I love that curve.
That's one of our core frameworks for, sense making of why are co-ops invisible in a capitalistic structure, right? And we were talking about that before of like so much individualism. You can't imagine a small group of people doing something meaningful, right? So that's one of the frameworks that helps kind of sense make around that. I'm curious, Rachel, is there any other projects or things that you're working on, or so space for that? But also I'm curious of like, who else are you inspired by or influenced by now? And you can maybe weave those together.
Yeah, well, one of the what's next that I was thinking about as you were talking about the scale of this movement and the growth of it is starting with the Center for Family Life back in really like 2013 already, when CFL had been organizing immigrant-owned workers for a number of years. Organizations started coming to us in New York City saying, how are you doing that? Like, what are you doing to develop these solutions? And since then, there's been a training cohort where we've basically trained other organizations interested in co-op development. And one of the, silver linings, I suppose, of the pandemic in terms of things becoming virtual is that in the last couple of years, we've launched that cohort nationally and bilingually in English and Spanish. In fact, there have been folks from Canada, Mexico as well on those cohorts. And it's a 6-session training for folks all across different kinds of organizations who are interested in thinking about their models of co-op development, who are thinking about supporting folks in the community, who are often folks who are exploited by the dominant systems. And I love cohorts, and I love this cohort. So that will be coming up again in the spring. You can probably look to some of that recruitment in the winter. And so, I'm inspired by the dozens and dozens of worker owners, but also organizers who are really thinking about what are their community needs, but also what are the unique contexts in which they work that influence the organizing strategy of what kind of supports they might need, what kind of supports they might offer, what kind of resources do they need to develop internally or go out elsewhere for. And I love that all the folks from the worker owners to the organizers that I meet in this are really into cross collaboration and learning from each other and uncovering new possibilities for what might work. I think this organizing is also extremely queer as far as just like, wait, we don't have to just do what we've been taught in these like workplaces, in these educational systems, but we're like, let's create something else. Let's have a new form of relationship. Like, let's like have a little, fun and excitement and in our transformation of power structures from heteronormativity into, queer landscape of cooperatives. I can definitely go on and on about that too.
Did you share the name of that group or network?
So we call it the Co-op Development Series, and I continue to train as a consultant for this project. I suggest that folks follow Center for Family Life's Cooperative Development Project. You can go sign up for the newsletter,
Okay.
and we always promote it there. And folks can certainly reach out to me as well for the upcoming information for that. Yeah, we don't have our own little website for it or anything like that.
No, that's fine. But yeah, I appreciate again, it's kind of the theme of our conversation of just like, there are so many solutions, and that feels like this opportunity right now is to share them out, not as like you need to do it this way, but it's like this menu of choices of, hey, this group is doing this way and that way. And I like to talk to when I'm working with co-ops about like their own snowflake, like there's not just one way for you to do it, but you're your own beautiful snowflake, and like, what's your gorgeous crystal structure, and look at all these other, learn from all these other co-ops. And it's like, what resonates with you? Great. Your team, try that out. Don't just try it out and be done. Is try it out and then refine it, and have a kind of a design cycle or design loop where you're bringing in these things and you're refining them, you're making your own, and then also doing the same thing with sharing it out to other groups and passing it on, because this is how we're building the next economy, is very much collaboratively and sharing forward the solutions. If you and your work and your groups, you get these, great themes of development that are really powerful, great. We want to share them out with everybody we're working with too, right? Rather than, have everybody else kind of in their own silos, kind of struggling with the same problems.
That's it. Learning creativity. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Sean, for all your insights as well.
Well, yeah, likewise. So what do you need right now? How can our Next Economy listeners help you with your work? And thanks for all the resources. We'll have those linked in the show notes so people can click through and follow all that. But anything specific?
Buy co-op. Go co-op. Just, invest in your community. Look at the folks that are doing this work already. Put your purchasing dollars where your values are. Build with folks and learn about what they need. Go co-op.
Awesome. And you mentioned Center for Family Life. Any other, websites or, places people can visit specifically?
Yeah, nycworker.coop. That's New York City Network of Worker Co-ops. There's a link there as well for the policy platform that was launched. Go Co-op. NYC.org is CENIC, Cooperative Economics Alliance of New York City. And I'll share with you Riseborough's Food Democracy page as well to follow the good work going on in New York City.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for all your great work, Rachel. And maybe we'll have you on and again in another decade when we have 1,000 co-ops in New York City.
We'll be here doing that work. And thanks for all the organizing that you do and support of co-ops in this world. And this is an honor. Appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.